We all know Brexit is not going well. And if we had an actual grown-up in government that would be willing to stand up to what is essentially now a very tiny minority that wanted this Brexit, there would be a colossal change in the reversals. We know now, for example, that anyone who was under the age of 25 did not get a chance to vote in that referendum because they were not allowed to vote. And their lived experience of Brexit is not going to encourage more and more converts to the Brexit side. The idea that Brexit was going to be this forever push is nonsense. None of their ideas that the Brexiteers claimed about in 2016, all their grandiose promises, the fact that they oversold Brexit, the idea that it was going to be a balm to all the UK's problems. And yet, as we've said, we live in such a media age. You have them plastered all across social media, doing interviews, even on like random YouTube channels that were filming these debates as they were going on up and down the country of these Brexiteers making these grandiose promises. One of the biggest ones, of course, I love to repeat time and time again, when someone from the Remain side said, look, a vote for leave is a vote to leave the single market, to which Daniel Hannan, aka the brain of Brexit, the man who, if you had a Brexit question, then Dan was the man with the answer. He was the brain of Brexit, infamously said that no one was talking about leaving the single market. Only a fool would leave the single market and customs union. And yet, what happened? So, once again, all these promises have been trashed. And the fact that we are now getting the usual song and game of, oh, Brexit hasn't been done properly. Brexit would have only been done properly if they had listened to us. But as we said before, the Brexiteers were in charge. Boris Johnson's entire cabinet was full of Brexiteers. There wasn't a single Remainer among them. And even Theresa May tried to get Brexit done, but it just wasn't Brexity enough. So hence you got the big Spartan rebellion. And now, as I completely agree with this. This was in the Financial Times today. I completely agree with this article that Brexiteers just cannot even live with their own truth. They cannot accept the reality of what they have done, that these grandiose promises are not coming done. Hence, we are seeing this great regret form. So, before we go over today's article, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And of course, now on with today's article. So, this comes from the Financial Times, the title of How Brexiteers Live Their Truth Badly. Imagine you are a senior Brexiteer in 2016, a politician or journalistic cheerleader. You'll always remember the moment of the night of the vote when you realized you had achieved something historic. That's rare for a politician, of almost unheard of a journalist, even because Brexit was decided by popular opinion. Journalists, for once, mattered. The vote was your revenge on your conventional, unimaginative peers, some of them frustratingly with better careers who didn't see Brexit's potential. For years afterwards, you told yourself the comforting stories to try and perceive the illusion that Brexit would work out. Any setbacks would be righted once there was a real Brexiteer in charge. Again, this was what they believed. It's finally, I'm so glad this, because it really calls out a lot of these Brexiteers. Or when a prime minister dared unleash all that potential by slashing taxes. Everyone you knew agreed with you. But now you sometimes admit to yourself, we were wrong. Brexit failed. If you're a conservative, you'll probably be tossed out of power next year. And if you're in your 50s, like Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg or even Steve Barker, you're unlikely ever to return. The generation that will replace yours is overwhelmingly Remainer. And one day, the first line of your obituary will be Brexit. How will the guilty men and women deal with that? That is very, very true. More and more people who join the voting pool overwhelmingly are Remainers. If the Brexit vote were to be held today, it would be a very different story. A very different one. Tellingly, Brexiteers now hate to talk about Brexit. Whenever we Ramonas mention it, the standard Leave a rot is, quote, get over it, as if they were as if it were a defeat in a long ago football match, rather than the all-encompassing policy that will harm Britain for decades. And that is what we have been trying to get across since the very beginning. It isn't just one thing that you can somehow magically put right. It is something that will affect Britain for decades. You cannot just say that Brexit would be the balm, the solution, and then when you are given the chance, the opportunity, not even say how you would do Brexit right, or even how you would correct the current course. Because that's something they even refuse to do today. There was a Brexiteer on Ian Dale's sort of the cross-examination panel that he does, complaining about the fact that Brexit is failing. But only if they had listened to Brexiteers. It was this, and again, it's complete nonsense because Brexiteers were completely in charge. They have no one to blame but themselves. And if anyone complains about Brexit, and especially if they were a Brexiteer, it's their own fault. They were in charge. This is what they apparently wanted. But it's not working out how they imagined. So, continues. I am concerned here with Brexiteers rather than with Brexit. But I should briefly lay out the evidence for its failure. The British economy is suffering the worst fall in living standards on record and will be the worst performing out of any G20 economies except Russia this year and the next, forecasted by the OCDE. Britain's goods exported are the worst in the G7. Foreign investment has fallen since 2016, despite the Brexiteer promise that more money for the NHS. More than 1 in 10 Britons is now on a hospital waiting list for treatment. And since most of these records began, life expectancy for the poorer people has fallen. So overall, that is not a good list. If you want to try and say Brexit has succeeded or succeeded in some way, that is not a good list. So, and even Brexiteers no longer even promise the sunny uplands to come. Having once touted the free trade deals with the USA and China, they are now busy trying to achieve free trade deals within the UK. Liz Truss and and others have tested to destruction this hypothesis that tax cuts would unleash Brexit's potential. Nothing unexpected came along with the upset of the Brexiteers' plan. There just wasn't a plan, and there couldn't have been. Brexit was just a wrong turn that will continue to distract British governments from serious issues such as climate change and even artificial intelligence. Some Brexiteers have responded by changing their story, and this is what we have seen, that there is this now changing narrative, that the Brexiteers are now trying to change this narrative, that it wasn't about economics, that it wasn't about trade, it was about something else. But this was Brexit from the beginning. Brexit was just this amorphous blob that was being sold as this wonder blob that would be solving all these problems, but without any real solid coherency as to how it would actually go about solving it. As we've said before, it's the typical underpants gnome solution of you do something, you take them, ? Profit. they can't understand that there needed to be something more than just sovereignty or get Brexit done. There was another step to these green, sunny, uplit lands, which they never really sort of put out. The much touted, of course, Liz Truss plans of we need to cut taxes, we need to cut regulations. Well, we saw what happened when Liz Truss went on this mad tax cutting spree. It almost crashed the economy and destroyed the UK pensions market. And what do you think is going to happen when you start to cut regulations? Well, instantly, trade with the EU for many UK companies who rely on UK trade is going to get even harder. We've already seen exports fall, it's going to fall even more. So Brexiteers, as we said, responded now to changing their story. But now they say that Brexit was never about grubby economics, only about sovereignty. As if voters in 2016 were told, you'll be poorer, mind, but it's unclear as to whether this whizzo new sovereignty resides. If the UK did actually set its own standards for products and labour, it couldn't sell the resulting goods to its neighbouring countries. And it hasn't even dared check if the vast majority of imports from Europe's, or even the fear of its own long border queues, nobody has ever seen a fresh tomato again. And as a result of acting alone in the world, Britain now needs France to stop the small boats. In short, Brexit will benefit Britain has joined the list of those rare political protestations that were now tested and proven false, such as climate change is fake, or Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, that gay marriage will destroy society, and some Brexiteers have of course, bought the full set of wrong causes. Now Brexit is passing from active controversy to past disaster, and like the Britain's participation in the Iraq War. But unlike the Brexiteers, the Labour politicians who took Britain into Iraq have achievements to set against their blunder. They bequeathed a country that was richer, longer lived, and had minimum wage and a properly funded NHS. Britain's choice on the Iraq War wasn't hugely consequential. The US would have fought the war and broken the Middle East without Britain. And as the Tory party and its newspapers continually take to their remorseless side, Brexiteers will fade from the stage into noiseless nothings. They may become like the communists after 1989, not quite defending their old ideology, but often offered valid critiques of the EU, like the ex-communists dissecting capitalism. Oddly, the current Prime Minister may avoid that fate. Like millions of armchair leavers, Rishi Sunak can use the defense of irrelevance. He was too junior in 2016 to have affected the outcome. He can spend the rest of his term trying to leave behind this slightly better country, and of course, trying to lose the legacy of John Major and Ken Clarke in 1997. All the Brexiteers still haven't learned that there's a worse political fate than losing. It's winning while being wrong. And I absolutely agree with every single sentiment put out there. It was very clear from the get-go that Brexiteers would be the worst losers ever. Despite having finally achieved Brexit, none of them can actually say how they would have done Brexit better. Of course, you get the occasional things like from Lord Frost, oh, we should have never agreed to the EU's timetable. Well, what timetable should we have agreed to then? It's always a cascade of, well, okay, we shouldn't have done that then. How would have you have done it? This is a question they cannot answer. They cannot accept that their entire project has failed right from the get-go. And they are rapidly running out of excuses because COVID was an absolute godsend to the Brexiteers. Because those first sort of 2 years, they can sort of sweep under the carpet of COVID. And of course, now you've got the Ukraine war. But as we've said before, the pandemic is fading fast. the economic consequences of that are starting to be very, very much relieved. All the other countries suffered that as well, but they're starting to do better than us. Every other country is suffering the same effects of the Ukrainian war. That's not going to go on forever. And eventually, when that ends, what excuse comes next? It's anything but Brexit. And eventually, there will come a time where they will have to admit Brexit was a failure. And I think that's exactly right, that they'll end up like the communists after 1989. Oh, communism would have only worked if, Brexit would have only have worked if they had done this, if they had done that. Well, we're going to get to a stage sooner or later where some of those people saying that were in charge. But the next coming up generation after generation is more and more pro-European. And it will not be long before parties will have to admit that they have to sort of say that this is now a big voting pool. Most people who voted for Brexit back in 2016 were over the age of 70. And yet you've got people now who are under the age of 25 who have voted Remain. They are not converting people to their cause. But this will be a constant economic, political, diplomatic, foreign policy disaster. And they are right. It is entering into many of the failed political lexicons. So it is only a matter of time until it gets reversed. And I think, to be honest, a lot of people are saying we're at a stage now where we thought this might be another maybe a couple of years before we start to really see the British public turn to realize that these were sort of severe economic problems that we were facing because of Brexit. Well, it's becoming more and more the example. This is why Brexiteers do not want to talk about Brexit, even though they couldn't shut up about it prior to 2016 and even after sort of 2016. Now it's just get over it. Well, no, this is a massive, constantly affecting problem that will continue to affect the UK forever until you actually admit your problems that Brexit has caused. Britain will be forever a sick man of Europe. And even if we do rejoin the EU, these problems aren't going to go away because the UK needs a really systemic, really good look at itself. And part of its future and part of that relook is to accept that it is part of Europe, that it is part of and should be part of the European Union. And until really that also happens, we're not going to get there. But when that real examination starts to happen of why Britain should be part of the EU, that's when I also expect that re-examination to start happening. So it's not going to be long. It is not going to be long. That I can guarantee. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is the Patreon page and the one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. And of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well, along with the YouTube thank you button. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.